The Priory of Sion is said to be a powerful, shadowy, secret society, which is believed to protect a profoundly ancient, sacred treasure, a treasure which they claim would bring the Vatican and all Christianity to its knees if it was revealed. The society came to the attention of the world in Dan Brown's bestseller, The Da Vinci Code, and many believe it does exist.
Priory of Sion are definitely real, and they definitely still exist. I'm aware of at least 9 current members of the order. I believe there are many more.
It's possibly a handful of people, but it is a front for other organizations.
They are a society with secrets. Some secret ritual. Some with an esoteric base that goes back 15th, 16th century, some of it.
But who are its members? And if it's real, what's its purpose?
Its purpose really is to, or has always been, to oversee the evolution of man. It's been about nothing else.
The Priory claim that they can trace their history back over 1,000 years.
It's an ancient organization that goes back to the time of the Crusades, led by thought leaders called Grand Masters, people like Da Vinci, Isaac Newton.
They also say they protect a great sacred treasure.
The treasure is either the body of Jesus, possibly the body of Mary, or that it's documents, that it's evidence, that it's gospels, that give evidence that the actual historic events were different to what we've got in the Bible.
And we meet a man who claims to be a member of the society today.
The Priory of Sion is a group of people with no strict structure. They all work towards a specific objective, studying spiritual and occult events.
The Priory of Sion first came to the attention of the public in the late 70s through the publication of a best-selling novel, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which created a huge controversy around the world by claiming that Jesus did not die on the cross, but survived to marry and raise a family with Mary Magdalene. The authors went on to claim that their descendants formed a holy bloodline which exists today, and which the Church in Rome still wants to stamp out. And if that wasn't enough, they also claim that a secret society, the Priory of Sion, is sworn to protect the bloodline and its secrets. But what's the truth behind these incredible ideas? Is it all just a clever hoax? And if so, who's behind it and why?
In 1982, Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln wrote a book called Holy Blood, Holy Grail. And they based their research on an earlier French book that had been published that talked about an organization called the Priory of Sion. And in the book, it talks about how Mary Magdalene had fled the Holy Land and had a child by Jesus. And from that child descended the Merovingian line of French kings.
One of the purposes of the Priory of Sion, one of the reasons it exists, is to protect secrets. There's information, religious, spiritual information, that can only be let out at certain times in history because society has to be ready for it. So it would be deemed heretical or explosive or shocking.
According to the book Holy Blood, Holy Grail, one of the secrets that the Priory of Sion keep is hard and definitive evidence of the marriage of Jesus to Mary Magdalene, evidence that would threaten accepted religious dogma and undermine over 1,000 years of Christian belief.
It's possible there's truth to the story that Mary Magdalene was pregnant with Christ's child. There's some question about Christ being married, and it was not mentioned in the Bible because it was unusual for a Jewish man in his 30s in those days to not be married. Mary Magdalene was present at the foot of the cross. She was there with the apostles. She was the first one that Christ revealed himself to when he rose from the dead. So there are many reasons why it's a popular theory, popularized by Dan Brown, that Mary Magdalene was married to Christ.
I read Holy Blood, Holy Grail years before Dan Brown came out. And it was for many people an earth-shattering assertion that the marriage at Cana had been rewritten, that it was Jesus' marriage, that it was Jesus' marriage to the Magdalene. These were all older ideas than most people thought. A generation had passed since anyone had seen them.
Agent Lee and Lincoln's book, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, hit the book stands, and it built on the idea of the Priory of Sion as an age-old secret society, protectors of a bloodline, but this time they added to the Merovingian bloodline the idea that the Merovingians were descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. So it was a sacred bloodline. And this, of course, just really took off. It excited everybody to the utmost. And then Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code didn't really add very much apart from stress the idea of the Priory of Sion as a secret society devoted to protecting the sacred bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene.
And it caused a huge scandal. It was heavily featured in the press because they'd arrived at the conclusion that Jesus was married and that he had fathered children. And this came as a great shock to many people who had been living under the belief that what their church had been telling them was true. And also it was very challenging for the Catholic Church because it went against 2,000 years of dogma. Because if there are descendants of Jesus, it puts the Pope into conflict as to whether he really is the single source as the most important religious person on earth. Suddenly there are challenges. If you've got a descendant of Jesus, should we be listening to somebody who's elected as a pope? Or should we try and find these people?
After The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail became a bestseller, the Priory of Sion became this sort of sinister organization, and people thought that what had been shared so far was just the tip of the iceberg. What else has been concealed down through the ages? Who else is a member? What do they really control? Are they controlling our governments today?
In the early 1970s, a Frenchman claimed to be the then Grand Master of the Priory of Sion. His name was Pierre Plantard, and he agreed to be interviewed for the BBC in Paris.
Can you tell us whether the Priory of Sion still exists today?
À l'heure actuelle, Sion existe toujours.
Monsieur Plantard, over the centuries you have, how shall I put it, you have supported the Priory of Sion.
Nous avons soutenu Sion. Et Sion nous a soutenus.
We. Who are we?
Nous, je parle de la lignée mérovingienne, car notre lignée est issue de Dagobert II. Les Mérovingiens, ce sont eux qui ont fait la France.
Plantard claimed to be descended from the Merovingian line of kings in France, but he had absolutely no background with those line of kings.
So Pierre Plantard really was nobody. He was an editor of a magazine, small circulation, not on any sort of world stage, but guess what? That was his aspiration, to be on the world stage and to associate himself with a lineage, an ancient lineage, that would give him the political prowess to potentially be the King of France, if not Europe.
Historian and author Andrew Goff has spent much of his adult life investigating the Priory of Sion and recently tracked down the location where the Plantard interview was filmed.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. So nice to meet you.
Oh,
Thank you for allowing access. This is fantastic. So this is it. This is where the interview took place. So Plantard only ever gave one interview, and it was here. So, back in the 70s, Henry Lincoln, co-author of The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, interviewed him here in what was his flat. The thing is, Plantard totally looked the part. He was a little nervous. He was distinguished. He was a gentleman of a certain age. He was wearing, a fine suit, and he looked like the kind of guy you'd expect the Grand Master of the Priory of Sion would look like.
One of the most interesting aspects of Plantard's interview was his mention of an obscure village in southwestern France called Rennes-le-Château. He said that it held a great secret, a treasure, but not necessarily a material one.
Monsieur Plantard, is there still a secret at Rennes-le-Château?
Mais le secret n'est pas seulement à Rennes-le-Château. Il est aussi autour de Rennes-le-Château.
Will the treasure of Rennes-le-Château ever be found?
Ici, vous me parlez d'un trésor matériel. Nous ne parlons pas de trésor matériel. Disons simplement qu'il existe un secret à Rennes-le-Château. Il est possible qu'il existe autre chose autour de Rennes-le-Château.
Fascinating interview. I'll never forget the look on Plantard's face. Totally incredulous. Like, either can't believe you figured it out, or I can't believe you've come to this conclusion. I never really meant for any of this to be taken very seriously. For the life of me, I don't know which I believe.
When pushed by the BBC interviewer to reveal what the secret was that the Priory guarded, Plantard was less than forthcoming.
Je ne peux pas vous répondre à ce sujet.
Watching the interview today, it's really amazing to look at Plantard and how he behaved. He was nervous, and he's talking about things like the Priory of Sion, and he seems relatively comfortable with that. But when Lincoln asks him directly about the mystery of Rennes-le-Château and tells him what he thinks it is, Plantard's reaction is really peculiar. First of all, he says, the mystery is not in Rennes-le-Château, it's around it.
The small southern French village of Rennes-le-Château has been at the heart of the Priory of Sion mystery for over 40 years. It's said that in the 1890s, the village priest became fabulously rich overnight after digging up a vast treasure. But what did he discover? Was it gold and coins, or something much more important?
Rennes-le-Château is a small town in the French mountains that has some unique characteristics. A father named Sunier was in charge of a church there. Suddenly, in the 1800s, he started making lots of improvements to the church. Everybody wondered where his money came from. The rumor started that he had discovered buried treasure inside of the church.
The mysteries of Rennes-le-Château are three. Where did he get the money? What did he actually find? And why did he do with it what he did, which was the way that he's decorated his church is very unorthodox. So those are the underlying mysteries of Rennes, and they exist today. You can go and research them.
The possibilities of what Bérenger Saunier found are almost endless. Did he find information about the whereabouts of the bodies of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene? Did he find something as simple as treasure from the French Revolution? Did he find heretical information that the church would have been nervous about getting out into the public, such as Jesus Christ not being crucified? The possibilities are really quite daunting.
Priory of Sion are clear that there is, or there were, very important items at Rennes-le-Château. They certainly allude to there being a body. And the question is, whose body? Because is it the body of Mary Magdalene? Is it the body of Jesus?
The Priory of Sion is said to be a shadowy and powerful clandestine society, which guards earth-shattering secrets about the origins of Christianity, including, it said, proof that Jesus did not die on the cross and that he married Mary Magdalene and had a family. The village of Rennes-le-Château in southwest France has long been a place of mystery connected to these incredible claims. According to the legend, the village priest at the end of the 19th century, Béranger Saunière, was involved in a huge conspiracy. It's claimed that he found a great treasure here and became fabulously wealthy. Some say he found the tombs of Mary Magdalene and even Jesus Christ, while others say he discovered the hidden treasures of Jerusalem. There are even those who claim that he was handsomely paid off by the Vatican to cover up and maybe hand over whatever he discovered.
Rennes-le-Château is an interesting little town in the south of France in the mountains that has some interesting characteristics. A local priest named Béranger Saunière was in charge of the local parish. And suddenly in the 1800s, he started making massive changes to the church. The church was dedicated to Mary Magdalene, which was not that uncommon in the south of France. There was a cult known as the Black Madonna cult that basically venerated Mary Magdalene. So Saunière started making improvements to the church and built a big house and built a big tower and had suddenly come into a lot of money. And the question was where that money came from.
Historian Andrew Goff has spent years investigating the Priory of Sion and the Rennes-le-Château mystery. He believes that the village priest, Béranger Saunière, deliberately left clues to what he discovered in the decoration of the church.
So this is the Church of St. Mary Magdalene. We walk in, and this is what we're greeted with. Amazing. I mean, a devil. What's a devil doing greeting you in a Catholic church or any kind of church? Actually, it's not a devil. It's Asmodeus, who is the keeper of Solomon's temple and treasure.
Asmodeus is known in mythology as the guardian of the great treasure of the Temple of Solomon, and it's very unusual to find the statue at the entrance of a church. Did Saunière place it here to signify that this church was a place that concealed a great treasure also? Some people believe that he left an enormous clue in one of the Stations of the Cross on the wall of the church.
This is really interesting. The Stations of the Cross are generally standard, but there's some that are really peculiar, and this is one of them. So this is Christ being moved into or out of the tomb. What makes it peculiar is the fact that it appears to be a nighttime scene. And it appears to be a nighttime scene because there's a moon in the upper left-hand corner. And by Jewish law, you can't have a burial at night. So it seems to be, researchers believe, calling attention to the fact that something is not quite right with the story about the burial and arguably the whole crucifixion of Jesus Christ. The implication here is that if Christ is being moved at night, he's still alive.
There's also a curious depiction of Mary Magdalene on the front of the altar inside the church.
In the mural on the altar depicts Mary Magdalene in a cave that is clearly in the landscape of Rennes-le-Château. You can see one of the local mountains from the cave. And there is a grave next to her. She is beside a grave with her fingers crossed, which is the classic depiction of Mary Magdalene in art. So that identifies her. And there is a grave with a cross made of wood with 2 live shoots growing from the cross. And this was thought to indicate that the tomb of Jesus was perhaps in the vicinity of Rennes-le-Château and that there were 2 descendants from their marriage, that there were 2 children. So this was one of the origins of the bloodline, the idea of the bloodline of Jesus.
This is the altarpiece that Saunière commissioned or otherwise went and got himself. It's Mary Magdalene in a grotto, and it has all the symbolism you'd expect. But look at her fingers. Her fingers are crossed in a peculiar way, a symbolism of esoteric knowledge. On the left-hand side, as you're looking back from the grotto, you can see what I think is Rennes-le-Château.
Curiously, Saunier built a tower in his garden dedicated to Mary Magdalene. On its staircase inside is a small observation window which looks out across the valley to a burial site in some local cliffs, to what many believe locally was the burial place of Mary Magdalene after she came to France.
The theory went that Mary Magdalene had left the Holy Land while she was pregnant with Joseph of Arimathea and settled in southern France. As a result, this cult grew up in the south of France with this fascination with the Mary Magdalene story.
The fantastic thing about the mystery of Rennes-le-Château is there are so many theories. Did Saunier find gold from the Visigoths who had sacked Rome after they sacked Jerusalem, and all the Temple of Solomon treasure is purportedly in this area and was looked after by the Cathars, who were also resident all around Rennes-le-Château? Or had he found or been told where he could find the body of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene? Did he find proof that Jesus Christ was not crucified, that he was swapped with religious zealots?
There's a number of possible treasures at Rennes-le-Château, or that were put there for a time and then moved. The treasure is either the body of Jesus, possibly the body of Mary, or their children, so some kind of family tomb relating to Jesus. Or that it's documents, that it's evidence, that it's gospels, that give evidence that the actual historic events were different to what we've got in the Bible. To me, that's more interesting and more important. I'd be more, bodies are bodies, but actual documentation from the time is a far more interesting idea.
The Priory of Sion has become one of the most infamous secret societies in the world, thanks in no small part to their critical role in Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. They claim to protect solid evidence that can prove that Jesus did not die on the cross, and in fact went on to marry Mary Magdalene, have children, and maybe even escape to southern France. But how real is this proof, and the society itself? Gino Sandri is a French artist and academic who also claims to be a member of the Priory of Sion. For many years, he worked as the right-hand man to Pierre Plantard, the former Grand Master of the Order. Today, he lives in Paris, where he agreed to be interviewed.
As a member of the Priory of Sion, I was working with Pierre Plantard. I was a general secretary. Therefore, I was in charge of public relations and external communications. I was there at the interview with Henri Lincoln and Pierre Plantard. I helped Pierre Plantard prepare the interview, to say the correct things to Henry. They talked about a treasure at Rennes-le-Château. People knew that there were treasures at Rennes. There were a lot of treasure hunters looking for material treasures. Researchers had found tombs. They have opened them and found certain things. But Pierre Plantard wanted to make very clear that Rennes is a place where there are many layers of treasure. By shining a spotlight on Rennes-le-Château, you attract the public's attention. Everyone starts looking at Rennes-le-Château. There are lots of things that are coded and secret, because the whole thing about the Merovingian kings and its lineage is all just a legend. We wanted to make this public knowledge because hidden behind these legends are certain truths, certain secrets that we want to be known.
One of the great mysteries of the Priory of Sion are the so-called secret dossiers that appeared at the National Library in Paris in 1964. They purport to show not only the history of the organization, but most importantly, a list of its Grand Masters.
One of the big pieces of evidence for the Priory of Sion was a series of documents that were found in the Bibliothèque Nationale in France, which is the National Archives there. And there was a list of Grand Masters dating back from the time of the Knights Templar that included all sorts of famous people like Leonardo da Vinci and Isaac Newton, Jean Le Cocteau.
It's a who's who list of history. It's got Da Vinci on it. It's got all these important figures, artisans, painters, right the way through history, back to the old families. The early heads of the Priory of Sion were listed as members of the Knights Templar, the old nobility, like what would have been considered the bloodlines.
There's something quite intriguing about it, because although they couldn't possibly have been Grand Masters of the Priory of Sion, for various reasons, including the fact the Priory of Sion didn't exist until 1956, they're not random names. Yes, they're famous names, but they all had something in common. They're all interested in esoteric subjects. And it wasn't usually well known by the general public or even historians that Isaac Newton was an alchemist, or for that matter that Leonardo da Vinci was into esoteric stuff. I mean, that's fairly recent information. Whoever compiled the list had inside information about esoteric matters and who had been interested in it over the centuries.
If we believe the dossiers, then what it tells us is that the Priory of Sion is an ancient organization that goes back to the time of the Crusades, led by thought leaders called Grand Masters. And what they're doing is they're preserving an ancient order that is looking after a sacred bloodline going back to Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, and even before to the time of David.
Although there's no record of who deposited the so-called secret dossier into the National Library in 1964, it's thought that Pierre Plantard was behind it, in an attempt to legitimize the history of the society.
What it was in reality was a set of documents planted by Plantard in the Bibliothèque Nationale. And then later on, he discovered them and said that there was a royal bloodline, the Merovingian bloodline, that he could prove that that bloodline went back to Jesus Christ.
If you were to prove that Jesus didn't die on the cross, for example, that would have a detrimental impact if it was released at the wrong time to the wrong people. So the way Sion works is at various periods of time, what they call circuits, they release information. So they almost go dormant over long periods of time, sometimes hundreds of years, passing this information on through family bloodlines, aristocracy, and through secret societies, and sometimes through ritual. They will encode this information and pass it on to a time when society is prepared to understand it and to absorb it and to take it on.
One of those who claims to be passing this information on is an Englishman, Nicholas Haywood, who says that he is a spokesman for the Priory of Sion today, albeit in an unofficial capacity. He says they are a real organization, which is still very active today.
Represent the underground stream of vital knowledge, vital to man, man's evolution, man's past, for there have been many civilizations of man, far more than people think. I mean, and its purpose really is to, has always been, to oversee the evolution of man. It's been about nothing else, although, of course, it is esoteric, yes, in its nature. It is also mystical. It has to be, because man's origins are mystical. Normally, members are not permitted to divulge their membership. In fact, it's normal for them to deny it, even to the point of being, even though it may cause them legal problems, it may cause them political problems, it may cause them bankruptcy, it may cause them all kinds of unpleasantries, but that is part and parcel of the deal. Unless, of course, you agree to act as a spokesman, then obviously. I only know of 2 spokesmen for the Priory of Sion.
Who are they?
I'd rather not say. I mean, I'm acting as one.
But in terms of numbers, what would you say?
I'm not permitted to tell you what the numbers are. That was one thing that was made plain to me.
They are a society with secrets. Some secret ritual, some with an esoteric base that goes back 15th, 16th century, some of it. The point is often made that this goes back a long time. This is a question of honor. And if a man can't be trusted to keep the secret of a handshake, or the secret of a ritual, or an entrance password, how can he be trusted with anything else? That's not exactly a secret society. That's a society that has some secrets.
Haywood confirmed that while they do protect a great secret at Rennes-le-Château, it is not the body of Jesus Christ.
No, Jesus' body was not brought back to Rennes-le-Château at all. I will tell you now, Jesus' body was not brought back to Rennes-le-Château or its environs.
The Priory of Sion is one of the great enigmas of modern history. They claim to be an ancient secret society that protects evidence that Jesus did not die on the cross, but instead married Mary Magdalene and fathered a bloodline of descendants that still exists today. It's an incredible story, but is it true?
The Priory of Sion, or Zion, is a complete fabrication. The idea that this was some interior group protecting the blood of Christ. An absolute and complete fabrication.
I believe that there have been secret societies, and still are, that preserve information that, against current dogma of religion and politics, is kept quiet. Maybe they preserve artifacts. Fine, yeah, that's to be expected. I don't believe the Priory of Sion is one of those. I believe it was founded in 1956 by Pierre Plantard and his mates.
When the book Holy Blood, Holy Grail was released, it claimed that the priest of the village of Rennes-le-Château, Bérenger Saunière, discovered some coded parchments at the end of the 19th century during renovations of his church, which alluded to there being a great and sacred treasure buried there. Artist and author Jean-Luc Chimay claims that a French aristocrat, Philippe de Charisset, wrote and compiled these parchments alongside Pierre Plantard, and that the whole Priory of Sion affair was just an elaborate hoax. What's more, he claims to still have the original papers to prove it.
This is the dictionary of Bible that used Charisset to do the parchments of Rennes-le-Château.
He claims that de Charisset and Plantard lifted some text from an old reference book to create the coded parchments that were revealed to the world in Holy Blood, Holy Grail. They then added certain keywords to the text, including Sion, to make it say what they wanted.
It is the beginning of the story. If there are no parchments, there are no story. It's clear.
According to Chaumet, Pierre Plantard warned him not to go public with what he had seen, and therefore not reveal the huge hoax that they were hoping to pull off.
He gave me this, and he said to me, don't publish that, just 20 years after my death.
Plantard was claiming to be descended from the Merovingian line of kings, and that he was in fact in line to be the next king of France. This is something that he desperately wanted, and he was using the dossiers that were discovered in the Bibliothèque Nationale to back up his claim.
Plantard and his colleagues built the Rennes-le-Château mystery into their idea of creating the story of the Merovingian kings of France and their sacred bloodline. It was brilliantly done, you know, imposing one story on the other.
The whole idea that you could fake a lineage and become a king as a result of it, you know, that's something I think would have worked maybe 500 years ago in medieval days. It's not going to work in the 20th century. There's no way. It's amazing to me that they weren't laughed out of Paris, laughed out of France when they tried in the first place.
On closer inspection, the three main figures behind the modern Priory of Sion had a checkered past. So how much can we really believe them? Philip de Charissaye was a disgraced and penniless aristocrat. Gerard de Sede was a struggling author, and Pierre Plantard was a convicted fraudster.
There's a white elephant in this story. It's the fact that Plantard, de Charissaye, and de Sede, you know, their ambition to create this hoax, it should be applauded. It is amazing. It is a long con, and I don't think they ever dreamed they would be as successful as they were. What were they trying to do? They were trying to write history, to rewrite it, to create an expectancy about who should be the King of France.
Plantard was a con man whose reputation went back for decades. He had a history of starting these organizations and claiming hundreds or thousands of members that never had more than 1 or 2 people. And in fact, the Priory of Sion was started in the 1950s as an organization to lobby for better public housing and had nothing to do with the line of Merovingian kings or the body of Christ or anything else.
When you make a claim like you are the rightful heir to the throne of your country, or even if you insinuate that, guess what? You know, that's not going to be welcomed very cordially. So the courts got involved and said, excuse me, you know, we have a system here, elections. What are you trying to say? You should be king? Didn't go down well. And they took him to court. And as you might expect, he had to admit, and did admit, that he made it all up. It was a fraud.
If it was a huge hoax, there are still elements of the puzzle that don't quite add up. In 1963, French artist and former Grand Master of the Priory of Sion, Jean Cocteau, painted a mysterious mural in a church in London's West End. In it seems to be real clues, which support the Priory's claims that Jesus didn't die on the cross. Author and historian Lynn Pinknett agrees.
This is not the straightforward biblical story, quite clearly. For a start, you assume that it's Jesus who's being crucified, but actually there's no proof because all you see is the man who is being crucified basically from the knees down. Allegedly, the Priory of Sion believed that Jesus did not die on the cross and that there was a surrogate killed in his place.
In Cocteau's work, we find many motifs of death and resurrection. He painted a mural in the French church in London, which shows a scene of the crucifixion, whilst also displaying one character that appears to be Jesus not being crucified at the foot of the cross. You can only see the feet. It also originally had a mural at the front with an M made up of Mary Magdalene and Mary and linking them, but that's been hidden, that's been covered over now. The hiding of codes and symbols in art has happened throughout history. I think a lot of painters were given information through history. They were seen as a means to revealing information. The good thing about painters is they work symbolically and their works tend to be protected. Art is never destroyed. So it's a way of encoding things, of carving things into stone for future generations. You can put your symbolism into paintings. So it's common for art to be used to hide information and to protect information.
And over here, you see this extraordinary person looking very remorseful and upset, but with a beard and a fisheye. Now, there are other people in this painting with fish eyes, but this is the most marked one. And fish was the earliest symbol of Christianity. Now, could we be actually seeing here Jesus himself watching somebody else being crucified in his place. If there is one message to this, it's that Jesus did not die on the cross, and therefore he's not humanity's redeemer. And therefore, there's nothing special about him.
I mean, I don't believe the crucifixion was the fix is in, and we're going to pretend he's dead, make him fulfill the prophecies, and bring him back. I think that idea is upsetting and insulting to too many people. The Priory of Sion is not such an upsetting, insulting idea. It's just kooky.
The Priory of Sion is one of history's great enigmas. But how real is it? Are they an ancient group as they claim, who are sworn to protect a great secret, the survival of Jesus Christ after the crucifixion, and his marriage to Mary Magdalene, or is it a clever modern hoax created by Pierre Plantard and his friends back in the 1960s? The Da Vinci Code novel and subsequent movie brought the awareness of the Priory of Sion and the so-called Bloodline theory to the attention of tens of millions of people around the world. There are even those who claim that the Priory was somehow behind the movie, using the opportunity to attack the false doctrine as they see it of the Vatican. Most historians say that there is simply no credible evidence for the existence of the Priory or their claims, and it lives on in the minds of conspiracy theorists. But there is a growing acceptance that the truth about Jesus and his life could well have been distorted and changed down through the centuries, and that we are moving towards a time when an altogether different and possibly more human figure might emerge as the leader of Christianity for a new millennium.
The aim of the Priory of Sion is to further mankind. It is always to further mankind for its betterment. And that may mean breaking a lot of religious dogma, a lot of societal mindsets, a lot of nationalism, a lot of things like that that restrict people and hold them back. So there'll be various opportunities in history where if the right information is released, enough people will recognise it and will feel internally that it's closer to the truth than what they're being told.
The thing about the Priory is it's a bit like a magpie in the sense that it picks bits of myths and legends and puts them all together to make this mystifying but extraordinarily enticing and romantic story that just draws people in.
I don't think there's very much that you could find that would change the essential beliefs of Christianity. I really don't. I don't think the discovery that Jesus might have been married upset people as much as you might have expected. I don't think it would have changed too many people's faith. Christianity is too deeply ingrained in what we believe.
I don't believe the Priory of Zion is real. There may be people who claim to be members today, but I don't think there's an organization around anymore. There's too much evidence that Plantard was planting all this stuff and making up these wild stories that I just don't believe that there's anything to them.
We don't know for sure if there's a Priory of Zion or not. They come out in public a little bit, they lift the veil for a week or two, give us a quote, and they run away and hide. So I'd like a little bit of coming forth. I'd like a little bit of validation that they exist.
Everything to do with the Priory is like a kaleidoscope, you know. You shift it and you shift it and you see little bits that might seem to go together, and then you shift it again and, oh, you think, oh, it's all come together, and then it starts moving again, you know, into fragments. Because no one explanation ever works on any part of the Priory of Sion mystery.
Priory of Sion have existed for a long time, but they've used different names, and that's why they're so hard to trace and easy for people to say they don't exist. And it's a way of protecting information through history. You create an underground stream of information that you pass through different groups, and then at various points in history it's brought back together and it's released, a piece at a time.
It's possible that what's claimed to be the core secret of the Priory of Sion is in fact true, that Jesus married Mary Magdalene and then fled with her to France to avoid further trouble with the authorities in Jerusalem. It's also possible that they remained buried there, maybe in Rennes-le-Château, and that the evidence to prove these facts has been kept and concealed down through the centuries. And that was probably the Priory's greatest trick, to fuse history and conspiracy theory so seamlessly that there would be kernels of truth in their story, allowing people to make a leap of faith towards believing their version of events. Add in the incredible success of Holy Blood, Holy Grail and the Da Vinci Code, and the Priory of Sion story was catapulted into millions of homes across the planet, and a modern urban legend was born.